name is Nate Weisenberg. I'm here with Harris Mayer in Los Alamos, New Mexico. It's October 11th, 2017. And my first question is if you could just say your name for the camera and spell it, please.
My name is Harris Mayer, Harrismayer.
Thank you. And I know you had a story that you want to begin with, so I will let you go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time you have spent with me. I've spent some time thinking about this, but I've spent my life living it. So I will start reading a little bit, and then we can go into the conversations. So the title, Tidbits of Past and Future, the National Laboratories, Los Alamos and Livermore, and Personal Friendships, for the Atomic Heritage Foundation. And my name, Harris L. Mayer, and this is October 11th, 2017. I'll start. The Hiroshima nuclear explosion. We were standing in the corridor of the old chemistry building at Columbia University, waiting for the elevator to take us out for lunch on August 6th, 1944. I, Harris Mayer, remember the date, for it was the birthday of my sister Blossom. I was with my co-worker, Boris Jacobson. We were led by the head of our opacity group, Maria Goeppert-Mayer. Later, 1963 Nobel Physics laureate. Suddenly, Professor Harold Urey, head of the chemistry department and close friend of Maria and her husband, Joe Mayer, appeared from his nearby office. He told us, with satisfaction in his voice, that the uranium fission weapon had just exploded over Hiroshima. Not physically present then, but much in my mind, was Professor Edward Teller. He was the one who had arranged that the opacity work of Los Alamos lab be done by Maria Mayer at Columbia. Then she was not to have to leave her husband to come out to New Mexico. Edward Teller became like a father to me and influenced the rest of my life. Even more important than a second father, remaining behind in the opacity group was a very young woman, Rosalie Ann Heisenberg. I can imagine Edward and Maria talking each other about our group, wondering when the two, Harris and Rosalie, would get together. Later, on October 30th, 1946, became my bride. Next, I'm getting a very short thing about the universities. There could be no nuclear weapon without the fantastic capacity of the United States industry, but they needed the creativity to envision one and the scientific knowledge of what was required to bring that vision to reality. Whence came the scientists? From the great universities of Europe and the United States. The main universities of Europe were Cambridge of England, Copenhagen of density, that's Niels Bohr, and Leipzig, that's Sommerfeld and Heisenberg, and Göttingen, that's the mathematician Hilbert and Max Born. the physicist. From the United States, Harvard, Columbia, Chicago, and the University of California at Berkeley were the organizations responsible for getting the nuclear weapon together and actually making it.
Harris, you were going to tell me about one of the nuclear weapons tests or shots that you witnessed.
Very good. Now, the George shot on Eniwetok Atoll was a test of the probability of a successful thermonuclear weapon. At that time, the thermonuclear weapon was a very firm idea in Teller's mind, but he didn't have a successful one in his mind. Okay. Well, there was a great deal of preparation for the shot, and I was involved in the preparation. And this preparation was, for me, an introduction to some of the most important people in the rest of my life. I didn't know it at the time, but there I met Ernie Krause and Herb York. You may know the numbers. I made lifetime friends. We'll talk about the friends later, but they are even more important than the work. We start out from the Hawaiian Islands. The way you start out is you wait for the airplane. Well, the airplane comes and we don't get on. This goes on for 2 days. We get on the airplane. It takes off and it flies. And I look out the window, and on the right-hand side, the most right engine stops. Well, I was young at that time, and one engine out of 4 stops. That's nothing. Then someone comes in and says, the other right engine stops. I am so clear about that. Everything is fine. Somebody comes from the front of the plane and says, you all got to get in the back to get the weight. Now we have two colonels who are very great flyers, and they say, we ought to take care of this plane. And one of them goes up front, and he comes back. It's all right, I know this pilot. The plane turns around and we land. I go out, and there are 4 fire engines waiting for us. This seems just fine. Now, 15 years later, I tell this story just as I've just told you to a good friend of mine working, and he's a pilot and he knows of it. He said, Harris, you had just one chance. If he did it wrong a little bit, you were lost. I got so scared. Now, this is 15 years after this happened. I trembled, and for about half an hour, I couldn't get myself together.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
It's so wise to know that you don't know. Well, the plane takes off. It travels at 7,000 feet altitude because in those days they had no overpressure. And it's a long, long flight. And I have in mind now the difficulties of flying. And I know not about flying, but I know physics and I know geometry. And it's all clouded up. There were no radars at that time in the area. That pilot had to be an expert, and he had God with him to give him the light. As we came, the sun came out, and there's the island around it with the purple lake in the middle and a Weetak. We land, and they come, and you have to be called off. And they call off, and we had a great group of important people around. And Carson Mark comes off. He was the head of the theoretical division, and a wonderful man, and a friend for life. But he was a friend for many. But and he comes off, and everybody gets off the plane but me. Carson comes back, and he said, "You're not on the list." He said, "But I'll talk to them." And he talked to them. And he convinced the military that Harris-Mayer was essential. They couldn't let me go back on the plane. They would have to have me. And he arranged to have me. I had to take the secrecy test all over again there, and so I got on the island. But they didn't know that I was coming, and there was no place for me. When we get on Perry Island, well, of course, we know what to do. There was a man there who went home for 3 weeks. You just stay in his place. So I slept in his bed. I must say that the second time I came out to the island, I was very much well treated. Well, let's get back to the island and the shot. The shot goes off. It was a very, very big shot. It was deliberately promised to be that. It was supposed to be a test for the thermonuclear weapon. And there was a little bit of thermonuclear weapon there. And this was the pet of Edward Teller. By this time, Edward Teller was, how to put it? The word is he was a great friend. The fact was he was 13 years older than me only. My father was 25 years older than me. He was like my physics father, and he was so for the rest of my life. And there is a whole story about the rest. But I was talking with him now out at the island. And this was, the shot was supposed to be the shot which would be the forerunner of the thermonuclear weapon. And he said to me, I have this idea about thermonuclear weapons. And I say, Edward, this is the idea. And I said to him, well, we don't have to have the shot. He said, Harris, let me tell you some things. You must learn about life. It's not only physics. He said, if we don't do this shot, they'll say, why did you have to have it? Why did you prepare for it? So let's have the shot. And we won't be told to be we were fools for preparing for it and not doing it. And you know, we might learn something. We had the shot, it went off, and we did learn something. Let's go back to the George shot and its preparation. I was very much involved in the preparation. And so I worked with Ernie Krause, taught him all he needed to know for the experiment. And he became my sort of friend of life, and it was important later on. Of course, Berkeley was involved too, and Herb York was the young scientist in charge of a group, a fantastic group. There were 7 people and, 7 great people there. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. I, of course, had a hotel room, and Edward Teller was not there at the time. So I was working with Herb York and Harold Brown and Mike May and so on. And they didn't know anything about nuclear weapons, and they knew very little about everything else except the science that could be involved. And they were all great people. And I started talking with them and trying to teach them things. Well, teaching these people was just wonderful. We sort of all learned together. And Harold Brown was under Herb York, but I saw in Harold Brown the most brilliant person I had seen before among the young people. And he would ask the most important questions. Well, okay. So, I met these people, and Herb York, Harold Brown, Mike May were friends for the rest of my life and influenced me in very many ways. Let's get back to I'm on the island the shot is fired. And Louie Rosen had an experiment there, and he needed to get his film. Well, I went along with him. Now, I have to tell you something. Both Rosalie and I, we were married by this time. We got married very well. And we were at Los Alamos, and it turned out that we could not have children. And it was both Rosalie that couldn't have children, and I couldn't have children. So we were a perfect couple. And when it came to go in radioactive places, you know, it didn't matter with me. I couldn't have children anyway. So I went with Louie through the radioactive areas to pick up his material and brought him home. Incidentally, the boat ride there was how to put it, that was the place where there was the most trouble and the most possibility of having accidents in my life than the whole nuclear explosion stuff.
Just because the water was so choppy?
It's not that the water itself was so choppy, that the landing and the safety engineer, I forget his name for the moment, we were a great friend, said, the thing you have to worry about is you'll break your leg when you go off and it's smashed into the that was the risky thing out there, not the bomb. Well, we come back, and Louie Rosen goes into his little laboratory, which was an accessory to essentially a room where people could sit. And people sitting and waiting in one I was there. Next to me, Fred Reines. Next to him, Louie Rosen, and George Cowan, the four of us. And we were, again, great friends and great friends for life. And all of these people made wonderful lives. That should be, 4 stories in themselves. Anyway, here we're sitting, waiting for Louie to go through his films. And we're waiting, 5 minutes pass. We say, it didn't go. He's worried about it and he doesn't know what to do. 1 hour passes, and this is not an estimate, it's a fact. He comes out, he says, I have it. That devil, he had stayed in there. He saw that he had the right picture. He took out the microscope. He tested it. He found out what it is. He came out not with the film, but with the answer. I never forgave him.
And this was proving that the test had worked in the way you wanted it to work.
That's very much more complicated. But his experiment turned out right. Well, here, the results are unnecessary. At that time, Teller had gotten his idea for the real bomb that could work. And as I told you before, he told me that we should do the experiment anyway. Well, we became lifetime friends, Herbie Louie Rosen, George Cowan, Fred Reines.
So I guess my question, sort of going back a little bit, would be, how did you get involved in the testing in the Pacific?
You have to know everything about how the Los Alamos laboratory worked at that time. And it had nothing to do with organization, and nothing to do with what anybody outside would feel. And this was wonderful. So we in the theoretical division, at least a group of people who were older, not in age, but in being there. And Fred Reines was an example of this. And a little later than this time, let me go ahead for a moment, after Fred had done this wonderful work, he had the idea, and since this was about T division, this is important. He had an idea. He had become the person who was in charge of the theoretical aspects of the nuclear tests. And he indeed left T division and went to the special group. They had a fancy name. And he came back and went to Carson Mark and Pogo. And this is very good. All right, now let's start about this, because there's Carson Mark and he works with T division. But it is very important because it combines two wonderful persons, Fred Reines, who is my closest friend for life. The families were together. Rosalie and I, Sylvia and Fred, and throughout our life. And we exchanged houses together to see how each other's worked. And he came, Fred, and when I was trying to give a talk at one of the special things in the life of my son, I was failing. He stood up and did it for me. And there were many things that I did for him when his child, Robert, was in the Army. This was way after the war, when I arranged that I could get Robert a position actually in right near here for his stay in a very good position. And this is Carson Mark for the moment, and Fred Reines. Now, Fred was head of the Pogo staff, and in my mind, he would have become the next director of the laboratory. And Fred came to me and said, you know, it's time to me to do some scientific work. And he went up to Carson Mark and said, I don't want to do anything now but think about science. And he said, Fred, you deserve it from all you've done. Fred sat for 1 year thinking about science and what he should do, and out came the neutrino. The Nobel Prize for that was given to him too late. He did the experiments in 1954 and 55. 54, he said, probably there's a neutrino. 55, there is a neutrino. And in 1995, he got the Nobel Prize. At that time, Fred was ill. He was really unable to really appreciate the prize. And in 1998, he died. Now, I was with him through this whole time. And he had a wonderful life, there's no question about it. And he should have gotten the Nobel Prize so that he could enjoy it before. But the money helped his family. The Nobel people should learn about it. He died in 1998. This is almost 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah. I believe the Los Alamos Historical Society has his Nobel Prize. Is that right?
Oh, I didn't know that, but...
I think they have it in an exhibit now.
Oh. Well, Fred never had a lot of money, and the Nobel Prize was, his half was 400,000, I believe. And that just helped Sylvia, not Fred. He should have gotten that Nobel Prize when it could help him in life, not as a symbol. And Maria is a different story, and she got the prize in '63, and she lived quite a bit after, but she was frail at the end. The Nobel Prize was done well then. It was very nice. There were two people working separately on the same thing, not knowing each other, that they should share the prize. that was the fair thing to do. That's how good scientists are. They're good people too. Okay, now that's a sort of a diversion, but it says something about Carson Mark and how he treated T-division. And I'll say something about that. Take as an example, in my case. Now this goes back in the time, a T-division, and we're talking about, what is it, 1950 something, or rather early. And this is a time when Edward Teller had gotten his ideas, and I wanted to go along with the old idea for the super, not the thermonuclear weapon. And I said, there's something about this super which we should learn about. This was Edward's prize before he got the right idea. I want to follow up on that idea. I said, Harris, by all means do. So the super did not die. I did work on it. And I didn't keep that promise of mine. I worked on the new thermonuclear weapon again, as well. But as I understand it, and I never had the special things you need with Livermore, I will say that someone told me the super could go many years later. I had been working on the Manhattan Project, first of all in Columbia, and then when Columbia disappeared in just the end of 1945, we were transferred to the University of Chicago, and there Teller took me with him. Actually, the whole group from Columbia of the theoretical division people moved from, and the opacity group moved with Teller, Maria Mayer, Joe Mayer, and Harold Urey came along with us too. So we had a very good time at the University of Chicago, and actually, when I was Teller asked me to work on the opacity project in 1944, I said, I can't. I have to get my PhD. He said, I'll give you a PhD for this work. So, okay, I worked with Teller, and it comes out that I was with him working when Hiroshima came. So when 1946 was about to come, two things happened. First of all, the project disappeared in Columbia and moved to Chicago. I moved along with it, but I wanted to wait a little while because I was with my sister as a chaperone, going on the Christmas vacation with Rosalie. And that's the time I asked if she would marry me. And she said yes. Then I get a call from home. You have to get out of here and get to Chicago, otherwise you're going to be drafted. So I left my sister with Rosalie in the Adirondacks, ran down to New York City, got on a train out to Chicago for Teller and Mayer. So I didn't get drafted, and I left the woman who had promised to marry me behind. Now, of course, Edward Teller and Maria knew all about what I was doing and helped me very much along. They had gotten just what they wanted. They wanted to see Rosalie and I to get married. It took a little while time. In October of '46, I went from Chicago back to New York. I got the license, married her, and took Rosalie with me back to Chicago. Now, none of this would have been possible without Edward Teller. And when I say he was like a father, he was. Okay, going back, I'm visiting Los Alamos for the first time in my life, and this is where I want to be, because that's the future. Columbia was gone. I needed to get my PhD at Chicago now, and that was guaranteed by Teller. But there's all the red tape that's necessary, and I'll go on back later. And I am going to Los Alamos to see what it is. And it's all gone. It really died, and it was revived. And everybody was leaving, and they couldn't leave quickly, so the professors began giving classes to all the younger people so it would help them when they left. Now, clearly I knew the name Fineman, and I knew what he had done, but I had never met him. And I'm with a group of people from Columbia who had left Columbia, and I didn't know where they went. And here they were, all my friends from the physics department. Even though I was in the chemistry department, my heart was with the physics department. And there they are, and they're all sitting at a table. a young man keeps running towards us. It's Dick Feynman. He says, I've just found out something. I taught my class how to integrate. They can integrate any function. We all laughed. We know you can't integrate any function. He said, I'll show you how. He said, I taught them the numerical method. He said, you jerk, you fooled us. That's not integration. He says, you're darn sure it is. That's how I met Dick Feynman. And he became a special kind of friend. I did not spend many times, but only, about 5 or 6 times in my life with him. When Fineman left Los Alamos, well, Fineman had gotten along with Bethe. That was wonderful. You could hear the laughter in them. I wasn't there, but everybody could tell. Bethe and Fineman. And Bethe said, come along to Cornell with me. Well, at Cornell, he had to have a place to live. And it turned out that he lived in the same big house that a person who became one of my very good friends, Bob Frank and Evelyn Frank. Well, Bob Frank comes to Los Alamos, and I'm a very good friend with him. And later on, his daughter has to get married, and of course, Rosalie and I went to the marriage. And who's there? Dick Feynman. He's a good friend of Bob Frank's. Feynman is an amazing man in very many ways, and a very peculiar man, and that's the wonderful part about him as well. And he comes to meet Bob Frank and his child. He sees me and Rosalie. And he doesn't know me, but he knows that I'm Bob Frank's friend. So of course he says hello. That's it. Many other times I met Bob Frank, and one of the times was when I met Fireman, and one of the times when Bob Frank's daughter died of a bullet wound, and we don't know how that happened. Fineman came to help the family. Rosalie and I, Rosalie by that time, we'd been married for a long time, very good friends with Frank. We came also. And this was all that was there. Fineman took charge. And he stayed for 3 days with us. And he arranged how to make the Franks feel, sorrow, yes, but that life was still valuable. And he met with Rosalie now and I, and by that time, from other cases, we were friends. He took care of everything, and also he knew that Bob and Evelyn Frank should be alone at times. And so he spent time with Rosalie and me, and we talked about everything. That Fineman was not only interested in art, but he was actually a very, very capable. I was not at the laboratory during the war. I know a great deal about it from history, and it was an amazing thing. What was the spirit in the laboratory? Now, I was not there, but I learned about it in the future. And I will say it in a simple way. Get the bomb before Heisenberg does it. See, the older scientists knew Heisenberg. They knew him very well. They knew his capabilities. They didn't know what he would be allowed to do in Germany. We couldn't find out. And there was fear in their eyes when they came. I wasn't there, but I knew Teller very well, and I knew him all the time through that, because he came back to help in our work on the opacity project. The opacity project started in June '44 and kept on forever. It's still there now. So Edward would come, and he would certainly tell Maria everything, because she had the clearance. And so we knew, and he knew, and he was worried about Heisenberg. And so that's how I felt. We have to get the bomb before Heisenberg.
You were at, were you at SAM Labs at Columbia?
Yeah. Edward has said he'll get me his PhD. But how do you get a PhD in a university? They have to have a document.
Right.
Well, we had 150 pages on the opacity project. No, they can't use it. So we say, okay, we'll give them something. So Rosalie and I, my wife, sit down, and we tell about the hydrogen and helium things in the sun. And we write a paper together. And it's 10 pages long. And we give that to the university. So that's what's in the laboratory for my PhD. And Rosalie and I wrote it. And she did the actual typing also. And Teller, of course, said, sure. Now, the opacity paper is now declassified, and you can read the 150 pages if you want to. But we violated all the laws without breaking the rules. And I'll tell you about the way the PhD was actually given. Now, this work was completed in 1955, in 1945, sorry. And I'm told they're ready to give my PhD examination. It's 1947, Christmas time. I'm already out at Los Alamos. Well, I get on a train and come there, and they welcome me. And there's a little office there that I go to. I open the door. Who's there? As Edward Teller. There's also Maria Mayer, Enrico Fermi, and Robert Millikan. So we have Millikan and Fermi have their Nobel. Maria's going to get it. And Teller can't get it because of the Arby affair. So there are really 4 Nobel Prize people there. And I come in, and they say, Harris, welcome. Have a nice trip. How do you feel? So they start asking a question. Fermi, of course, asks a question. It's a question about opacities. That's the question I never could understand. I had worked on it, and I did the practical thing. I knew how to bypass it. Edward starts talking, and he tries to explain to Fermi what it's about. They're having a wonderful conversation. I'm learning all this stuff. Okay, they decide what the answer is to the question. Now, they try to teach it to Maria. She listens. Now, she's very good, but she's not Fermi. She's not even Teller. So they explain it to her. Finally, she understands it. And they say, fine, that's great. Harris, we have to decide on your examination. Would you please step outside? Now, I have not spoken no word on this topic. And the doors on the University of Chicago's, they're this very thick, heavy thing. And they open the door, and I go out. The door is not closed, and they say, Harris, come in. And Edward said to me, now you are a PhD, and you must call me Edward, not Professor.
Wow.
It's called the Brotherhood.
I got it for a paper that Rosalie and I wrote on the opacities. The important problem on what was in there was solved by Fermi and Teller on my examination, and I got the credit. Now, this was how Edward Teller helped me in life. So I must tell you another thing that has nothing to do with physics. This is to do with Francis Ritchie. I'm working with Francis Ritchie, and now this was in 1961 or something like that. And I have a problem. I don't tell her about it, but this is something that's just worrying me. I happen to have a trip up to, I'm living in Los Angeles, working there.
We just met in 1960.
Yeah.
September 1960.
Yeah. And she is a very, very good worker. So I happen to be going up to Livermore, and I see Edward Teller. And I say, Edward, what can I do? Here's this. And I've always said girl, not woman. This girl I'm working with, and she's very, very good. But she's so stubborn about this. And he said, Harris, you have to learn. You know your physics, but you must learn about life. You mustn't get angry at her. You mustn't try to convince her. This problem that you're talking about, it's absolutely trivial. You're talking about that she says 3/4 and you say 1, the numbers. You know, you must just leave that. As a matter of fact, when you work with her, you should make some mistake so that she feels good about this. And I take her advice very well, and we get along. We get along very much better, and she becomes not merely my helper, but my companion. Those people, Teller and Bethe, and I had relations there. These were good men, good people. They were not merely good scientists. And they always helped me. And Edward was there all the time. Anyway, it so happens, and I don't remember exactly when this is, but I happened to be at Los Alamos. This is after I left Los Alamos. And Marshall Rosenbluth, who also left Los Alamos, came back, and we're together. And it happened also that Bethe and Teller were there at the same time. Marshall and I get together and said, they're together. I mean, they're at the same place at the same time.
Do you have a date on this?
Something around 1960. I don't remember the date. We decide, let's get these two together. Both of us knew both of them. So, I'm the one to see Bethe. Marshall comes back and says, Teller is certainly willing to make amends. And I have this information, and I go to see Bethe. And Hans Bethe says to me, Harris, you are such a wonderful man. You know, and that's ridiculous, of course. And he says, you have so much kindness in you. And you can forgive Teller. I cannot. So that's the story, but it's not the end. The end is not nice. So Marshall and I, who knew both of them, and you know, we knew them well. We knew them not merely as scientists, we knew them as friends. And certainly Bethe and Teller both helped me in my life and knew everything about it. So we gave up. And this was, of course, about the Abbey affair, that Bethe couldn't forgive Teller. But I must say something more. There was a difference between these two men, and this Abbey affair, I think, accentuated the difference. And they kept apart, and they kept apart in making commendations and suggestions about significant things in the military and other parts of life. And I'm watching these two people, and this is in I have to get this exactly right. This is one of the military affairs in aircraft in combat, and it's the very large bombers, and Edward said, well, they will be able to do it. And Bethe says, no, they won't. And I know about all of this. I know about all the things. And what it is at that time, it could not be done. And Edward had an idea that it would be done in the future. So they were both right. At that time, it couldn't be done. In the future, it could be done. Bethe said it couldn't be done. Teller said it will be done. And the Abbey affair was behind. Look, those two men were so smart that they could certainly see that not now, but in the future, is trivial. But the Abi affair means they must be apart. So, knowing both of these men and essentially worshiping both of them, I could not get them to say yes together. I have had a full and in a way a blessed life. Let me say some things about it. I'll go a little further back. When I was 15 years old, I had been friends with a boy, and he had a younger sister, and I knew her a little bit. And when she became 14, she was a woman, I fell in love with her. She fell in love with me. It was and is a great love. We were together in that special way, but it was clear to both of us that it was not a marriage. So we kept knowing and being with each other. And indeed, I was the week with her before she got married. And we were very close. She got married. That was my first love. Now, that was when I was 23. I meet Rosalie. Now, this is a nice person. And after a while, I knew her well enough, and we got married. And then, as I've told you before, I guess, that we were a very good match. Neither of us could have children of our own, so we adopt 3 children and have a very special life after that. And after 40 years or so, more than that, even more than that. But in the meantime, I know Frances and work with her. And Rosalie dies. And after a while, I know her so well. Did I tell you this before? So I say, you know, why don't we get married? And she says, do you think I'm crazy? I've been married 3 times before. It was terrible. So I say, all right, let's live together. And after 4 years, I say, Frances, you know, if we get married, we can save some money on income tax. She said yes. We got married, and that was in 1994. And now this is a woman who I've known since 1960. We finally get married, and we're living well forever after. Well, you know, what I wanted to say at the beginning of this, I want to talk to you as physicists, and we're people too.